out of a tree.
That's right, we'll talk about that later.
Claire.
Hello and welcome to the Virtual Nature School. This is part of our inquiry around It's Not Just a Box. And today what we're doing in our inquiry is opening up that idea around human beings and how we work with animals and insects, birds, bees, things like that, to actually work with them to provide us with some food. So today I am joined by my co-host. Tommy, would you like to say hello? Would you like to?
Hello.
Hello, hello. Thomas is very clever in all things to do with bees and combine harvesters, tractors, all things like that. Those are your favourite things.
I like diggers too.
And he likes diggers too.
And construction stuff.
And lots of construction stuff. So we would like you to watch our film.
Invention, construction, invention.
Yeah, we like inventions. So how about you have a little look at our film, all about using boxes, but using boxes that have got something to do with this, which is a bee. Have a little look at the film and we'll get back to you and see if you've got any more ideas.
These are the stingers that sting us.
Here we go. Let's have a look. So we'll unmute now so we can.
Hello, welcome to this film, which is all about It's Not Just a Box. And we're going to be exploring an insect that really thrives inside a box. Now, we've been looking at boxes a lot. We've been taking them apart. We've been making new things. We've been making memory boxes. But all the time we've been doing that without us even realizing it is that we've been learning our shapes. So the shapes that you've been finding inside a box, which is what you call a cuboid or a cube, is actually these. We can see there's a rectangle and a square and a triangle and something called a hexagon. And that yellow shape, the hexagon, is an important one because we're going to find out about an insect that uses that shape to build their nest. Inside our talking tub, we could have done all sorts of things about insects and about different shapes that they like to nest in. But the one we're going to focus on is something called a bee. And we're also going to look a little bit at another one called a wasp. The question we're going to ask ourselves is, what is the connection between a bee and a box? But what we're going to be looking at is this bee. And this bee is a honeybee. And he's called an insect because he has a head and he has the thorax, which is like his chest, and we have the abdomen, which is his body, the bigger bit you can see at the back. He's also got 6 legs, so we can tell that he's an insect. And what's really good about honeybees is that somebody, through watching them very carefully, realised that not only were they going around to all the plants and helping us pollinate them to make new plants, they were also creating something rather delicious, the honey. Now, honey comes from this, which is the comb, and the honeybees make this. And the liquid that we eat is actually something that they've created. So if we're clever, we can actually work with the bees to make sure that they've got enough honey and we've got a little bit of honey as well. Now, originally, bees made their nests in trees. They used something called wax because it was waterproof, and they found that they could lay their eggs in each of these little holes, give their little embryos some food, and then they could cap it off and keep them nice and safe. So if you go into the wild, you'll see this kind of nest. But what somebody decided to do was to create something called a skep. And a skep is a bit of a basket, if you like, upside down. It's made of binding together bits of grass. Has a little door for the bee to get in. And bees are very accommodating because they started to build these lovely shapes inside these baskets. And that meant that the people would gather the baskets and open them up and take some of the honey and leave a little bit for the bees so that they survived. Now we put bees in beehives because they're easier for us to manage. This is something we're going to be talking about today because it's a bee in a box. And we have lots of experts here in our little community who are going to share with us their thinking around bees. One of the things that fascinates me is that they have a way of communicating with each other. They do something called a waggle dance, which you might want to research today. They make very, very good honey if we give them the right things and the right environment. But sadly, for some bees and wasps, they're finding that there aren't enough places for them to go. So we need to be friends to bees and wasps and all the pollinators like butterflies, because they help us to make sure that we've always got food. So here's that lovely pattern that we talked about, that lovely hexagon shape. And we can see these worker bees are putting stuff into the holes that you can see. And on the very down part of the photograph there, you can see they've started to put a waxy film over the top to seal it. You may have had a different type of box. Maybe someone delivered a box of honey to your house. Honey can come in all sorts of slightly different flavours, because whatever it is that the bee is collecting the pollen from tastes the honey. So in Scotland, we have heather honey, which is very famous. You can see here, they're slightly different colours. They also are so brilliant that they give us something else that we sometimes use at the nature school called beeswax. So beeswax is lovely for making candles, and it's lovely for putting into lotions for your hands to keep your hands soft. So they're very good and very helpful insects. Here's a bumblebee, and it got its name Bumblebee because when you see them in the garden, he seems to bumble about as if he doesn't know where he's quite going. He's a little bit fatter, a little bit wider. This is another one you might have seen. Now this is a wasp, and a wasp actually has a different way of behaving. It makes a nest, but it's often in the round, and it often hangs from a ceiling, hangs from a place where it can keep dry. Unlike the bee, it doesn't give us a lot of honey. And some people find wasps pretty annoying, but they have their place. And so as long as we're calm around them, they tend to fly on past. Here's a little tiny fellow who often gets mistaken for a wasp. This is called a hoverfly. And you can see the difference in a minute when I put all four of them up, because he's got much bigger eyes, the hoverfly. He doesn't sting, he doesn't hurt us in any way, but he's a very busy character who goes from flower to flower. So when you put them all together, this is the difference. So we've got that fatter bumblebee, we've got the wasp, who's much leaner, much thinner. We've got the bee, who's got that furriness over him, and he's the one that's really got the job of making our honey. And then we've got the hoverfly, who not only has bigger eyes, but he also has orange legs. So if ever we see any of these, we're not to be scared, because these are our friends. We're sharing the planet with these insects. When we watch them, it's amazing to see how busy they are, because they seem to never stop. They come and they go from the flowers in our gardens. One thing you might like to do today is to do some research around those four different types of insect: the bumblebee, the wasp, the honeybee, or the hoverfly, because they've been inspiration for all sorts of different television programs and cartoons that you might find about. If you're going to make a hive, the important thing is to try to get boxes of the same sort of size, because a hive is made up of different boxes stacked on top of each other. Perhaps you could do what Esme did, because Esme decided in a previous inquiry to investigate bees. This is her model that she made. This is by Esme and her family, and she's done everything really in her research to find out about bees. Because when we understand what the insect is like, where they like to go, what they like to eat, what things scare them, it helps us understand why sometimes they look a bit bothered by big human beings. When we're looking after these little insects, we have to think that they're all slightly different in what they want. Now, you can imagine a bumblebee is a little bit wider than the other bees. So often bumblebees struggle to get into habitat hotels because they're too wide. So you might want to make a bumblebee shelter. It's going to have wide tubes in it, And they like the fresh flowers to be able to get some of that nectar. That gives them energy to move. So you might want to put some fresh flowers at the bottom of your shelter, or you might want there to be a little dish of some sugary water. Some bumblebees prefer to be underground, and so you have to be careful if you think you've got a bumblebee nest, because they like to go into the ground and build a nest in that darker, cooler space. If you want to, you could be someone who has a bee community, because all of the bees have different things they like to do. So this is one I rather like, because at the very top in that triangle, we can see there's some clay that they've put in there, because this is a miner bee, a bee who likes to be able to excavate the dirt. They've made sure there are holes to go in. They've made sure that there are tubes and that there are holes drilled in the end of the wood, so that some of those wood wasps can actually lay their eggs into those holes. So they've put a big cover over it, and I wonder if you can guess the reason why. Well, part of the reason why is that all of those materials look very attractive if you're a bird. Things that you might find useful to make your bug hotel would be sticks. You've got to think like a bee. So what would you like to curl up in? Maybe some grass, maybe some leaves. Maybe you'd like to shelter underneath a broken plant pot to keep the rain off you. Because when you get very wet as an insect, it's very hard to get yourself dry. You like it to be in the right location. Like most of us who choose hotels, you don't want it to be very wet outside. You want it to be in a sunnier location, because an insect needs the sun to help it warm up, to get going in the morning. The other thing you need to think about is when you go to a hotel, you like to know what food is available, and so do insects. So around your lovely place that you're going to build, whether it's a little resting shelter, or maybe it's a proper big bug hotel or a bee colony, you need to plant those wildflowers. So we need to leave areas of our lawn longer so that they can go and shelter in there when it rains, but also collect that beautiful nectar to give them that sugary substance. Bees need to drink. And so this photograph is rather amazing, isn't it? This photograph is a honeybee who's drinking from a droplet of water. And they need that water to be able to give them the energy to work. So we need to have places where they can go and drink. It could be a shallow saucer. It could be just a nice plant nearby where it can collect droplets of water like Lady's Mantle. So be thinking very carefully about your inquiry today, because we're talking about the relationship between bees and boxes, but you might also decide to look at wasps or hoverflies. You might also decide to be thinking a little bit more about other pollinators, because there are other things that you could look at, like flies or like butterflies. However you decide to spend your day exploring what it is that our friendly insects need, I look forward to hearing your theories, your ideas, and finding out what you've decided to design your box around.
We're talking. Well, it's lovely to have our friends. I can see Nicola's with us from Stirling, and that's lovely. We've got Finn and Sheila and Olivia. That's great. We've got some friends online. So let's talk to Thomas a little bit about what he's been thinking.
Bees like honey and sugar water.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And tell me a little bit about this that you found. What's that? Why is that important?
Because bees like to eat honey.
Mm-hmm. And what is it about that flower that's special then?
The blueness.
Ah, nice. Good choice. Yeah.
There's flowers all around it, isn't it?
It is beautiful. It looks like flowers. Lots of flowers all coming together around one big flower.
Yes.
Where do you think the bee goes in the flower? Where does he go in that middle bit, you think?
And all around the rest.
And all around the rest. So that one's called a cornflower, and it's an amazing, beautiful flower. It's a lovely blue, isn't it, Thomas?
Yes.
It caught our eye. And just when Thomas was holding it, what happened was that a fly came along and tried to sit on the flower that was right in his hand. That was pretty amazing, wasn't it?
So you picked it, didn't you?
We did. We thought we'd treat ourselves by picking one of the flowers so that we could show you one of the flowers that grows in our garden here. So the other thing that Thomas wanted to show you was this. Do you want to talk a little bit about this, Thomas? I hold it.
Beehive.
It's like a beehive, but tell me what it's made of and things like that.
A dead tree.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a chainsaw that cut it down from a dead tree. Then they made a shape like this, like a tree surgeon.
Ah, tree surgeon. That's absolutely right. And so
a digger just digs the roots up. Then a tree surgeon comes along and cuts the top off.
Ah.
Then a logging truck can come along and pick the logs up, and a log lifter.
Yeah.
And an excavator log.
That's a great word, an excavator. So one of the things, remember, that Thomas loves to do is obviously he loves machines. And so let's think now a little bit about the machine perhaps that made this, because this is the model of the bee. But what did we notice is missing from these little model bees?
This wing.
You've only got one wing.
And legs.
There's no legs. And a real bee, of course, has 6 legs. So we know that actually when we make things, they can make them beautiful. But sometimes we have to really think about the detail of that little insect. What was good is that they have the head and the body and the abdomen. So we know it's an insect. So that's great. Let's put those back on our sculpture here, because it's rather a beautiful thing that we put on the table when we're going to be having our snack. And so today, because we're exploring bees.
I'm not staying for lunch.
Okay, maybe for snack, what we'll do is see if we've got some honey, and then we can have a little bit of honey with a little bit of fruit. That might be a rather lovely thing to eat today. Managing? Perfect.
That's it sleeping.
That's it sleeping. So if you decide today that you want to have a go at making your own hive, you might decide that you want to use wood. What other things could we do to make our little bees, Thomas, do you think? Apart from wood, what other things might we use?
Wax.
We could use wax, absolutely. That might be quite good if you have wax. What other things could we use? We could even get a stone and paint it and make it look a little bit more like a bee. Be hard to do the wings on a stone, wouldn't it? We could find a fir cone and maybe add some bits onto the fir cone to make the wings of the bee. So there's all sorts of things around us in the natural world.
3 pine cones.
Great idea, Thomas. 3 pine cones, and then that means you'd have a small one for the head and another one for the body and another one for the abdomen. All right, so Nicola, come and read this, Thomas. Nicola's saying, let me read it to you. Nicola's group over here, look, it says, we're going to go and feed the chickens, and we're going to have a look at the beehive that they've got and make some lone bee houses, because not all bees live together in that box, in that beehive. Some bees like to be solitary bees on their own. Do you remember when we had that giant bee come and it had the long bit at the back and we were like, whoa, it's so big, but it was actually a wood wasp. And we discovered that the long section at the back was actually an egg-laying tube. It wasn't a stinger at all. Let me read to you what Sarah says. Sarah says they're going to Flanders Moss to find lots of insects and their homes. So I think we might do that. Should we go out and have a bit of a walk in the forest?
Yeah.
You want to wave goodbye to folks?
Bye.
See you later. Bye.
I can shout me.